I commend this bill to the House. Thank you very much.
I call Tracy Martin.
Kia ora, Mr. Speaker. Thank you very much. It's just firstly to make a comment on some of the issues raised by other speakers. It is always a joy to listen to David Cunliffe wax lyrical about hypothetical young Peter. But while it's amusing on many levels, the reality is that it has a lot of truth in what he said. But I actually resent that member's assertion that our older generation are mean-spirited and greedy, and that they seek to starve our young people of their future, and that is the reason why this bill is a bad thing, even though the Labour Party is going to continue to support it. So, because I would not like the country to forget, because most of us haven't forgotten, that it was actually a Labour government that set our feet upon this path, that took away the free education that my generation and the generation before me had the opportunity to avail themselves of. But I don't want to forget that it was a national government that then slipped their feet into those shoes and started to run down that pathway to bring us to the point where we're at today, where young Peter is now being suggested that he blame old Peter for his circumstances, instead of actually saying these are the two parties inside this house that brought that young Peter and old Peter to this place. So let's not forget that. The divide and rule that goes on between our young and our old is not constructive for the country as we move forward. With regard to this bill, though, New Zealand First will support this bill as it supported it at first reading. It's a technical little bill. It does two very sensible things, in our opinion. It had an opportunity to do a couple of other sensible things, and there are SOPs being prepared now. I mentioned in my first reading that we supported the Minister when the repayment holiday for overseas-based borrowers was condensed from 3 years to 1 year. We did that because of what we believed was the intent of the bill, which was, one of the intents was actually fairness. But that fairness is still not here inside the legislation. New Zealand-based borrowers receive no recognition for circumstance change that means that there are times in their lives when they may need a 1-year repayment holiday. And I gave examples of young New Zealanders in situations where they may have such financial pressures. They may still be in employment, so still meet the criteria by which they should be making those repayments, but their personal circumstances are such that as a state we should allow them to take a 12-month recess from their payments, be able to reorganise their financial lives and then come back. Because this is about supporting our citizens. This is not supposed to be about punishing them, it's supposed to be about supporting them for the good of the country. The other small technical piece that could have been addressed, and another supplementary order paper will come through for the Committee of the Whole House for it to discuss, is actually about attaching any repayment holiday to the loan rather than to the person. It is an anomaly to me, as a previous debt collector, that when a person has shown that they are a responsible citizen, that they take their debt seriously and they have sought to repay it, that they are then penalised by never, ever, ever being able to access another loan with another repayment holiday. It doesn't make sense to me. They're the very people that you want to encourage to participate in this sort of process, as opposed to the constant conversation about people going overseas and never coming back and buying Maseratis or whatever that we used to have around these, the student loan repayment scheme. So there will be some supplementary order papers coming through. I did not sit on the Select Committee. It's not one that I was available to have, and I take on board your disappointment, sir, but when I can, I will try to get onto that Select Committee. And I note, however, that many submitters did actually take note of those exact points inside my first reading speech, and I thank those submitters for their obvious high standard of involvement inside the submission process. Most, however, of these submissions, I note, on behalf of those who have loans, are on behalf of those who have university loans. And I don't want us to forget that actually every baker, every tradesman, every young apprentice is inside this scheme. This is the StudyLink scheme. This is all those young people that don't sometimes, most often, don't have unionised representation, and so we don't hear their voice inside this process. Those are the workers of tomorrow, not those that can access high incomes because of a PhD, but those who on everyday basis we rely when we go to the bread shop or when we go to the car mechanics. They are also affected by this bill. So let's not just talk about it as if this is the elite that can afford it. These are real people, real young people who just on everyday basis we rely on them. I also want to pick up on the New Zealand Medical Students Association submission, an excellent submission. They addressed many of the points in the first student amendment bill, so there's nothing that New Zealand First can do inside this bill in reality to support the concerns that they had. But we do take on board their comment around the restricting of the access to student allowances for those who study for over 7 years. It doesn't seem logical or sensible to New Zealand First to penalise those, particularly in the area of medicine, to penalise them to such a point where they either don't continue to study in that field of endeavour, or where they feel so disenfranchised by their own state that they take their skills somewhere else. New Zealand First does not buy into the argument that these students at the end of their study have a greater access to income, so therefore they should get more debt now. We don't argue that they probably do have a greater access to creating income for themselves, but the argument that one day a person might be rich so that while that person's poor they should gain debt doesn't seem to make any sense to us. And they are still New Zealand citizens. The purpose of the state, the purpose of StudyLink was to support New Zealanders to study. So New Zealand First, again, we could not do anything inside this particular bill around that, but I wanted to make sure that the New Zealand Medical Students Association and other students' association that presented to the Select Committee, all of their submissions I have read, that New Zealand First will continue to address this issue. We will continue to seek ways to bring us back to a point where there is a recognition about the good, the public good, that supporting young people to study does for your country. We would advocate a stronger social contract between the young that are studying, the support that are given by the older generation. I'm not sure that the older generation is so terribly outraged by supporting their young people. Remember, the young people we're supporting are their children and their grandchildren. So while I think there is often a whipping up of this division between the ages, when I speak to older citizens in public meetings, and when I go to the universities and talk to young people, when they speak of their own families, there is none of this aggression towards supporting each other. They just want their government to make a system that is fair and that is reasonable. But as I say, Mr. Speaker, these are small little amendments inside this bill. They're logical, they're reasonable. In this moment, there's nothing wrong with them. So New Zealand First will be voting for this bill. Kia ora.
I call John Hayes.